The first edition of Restaurant Storytime was received so well that it's time to dive into Restaurant Storytime Part 2. The first installment of Restaurant Storytime was from episode 19, and I went over a story of a snowball fight I had with another guy, except he was an unwilling participant, and it was indoors. This one's going to be another funny one. We're going way back to the very first year that I worked in the restaurant industry. This is a very famous story as far as the people I worked with. It's one of our favorites, so I'm hoping you like this and you laugh quite a bit. For the setup here, I was working in the summer, and it was nighttime. So I was a dishwasher then. I would do prep, and I would do dishwashing. There were 2 cooks working the line in the kitchen with me as the dishwasher. We had one of the cooks had gone next door, so there was a third guy, but it was slow enough that he had gone across the parking lot to the barn that doubled as our prep room / walk-in / freezer. So he's over there doing prep. There's the setup. One of the cooks in the kitchen told me I had to go next door and ask the prep guy over there for something. He said, go next door and get whatever. I'm 15 years old. I'm only a few months into my tenure working in the restaurant, so it's just yes, sir, and I go. As I'm walking across the parking lot, I hear a sound of something hitting off the barn, and I didn't know what it was. I looked around, and I could see one of the cooks standing there, but I didn't know what it was that hit the barn. I went in, spoke to the prep guy inside, got what I needed, was coming back, and here's one of the cooks standing out there again, and here comes a cherry tomato whizzing by me, and it hits off the barn again. So they're throwing tomatoes at me as I walk across the parking lot. I went back inside, delivered whatever it was I had brought over, went back to doing my dishes. Not too long after, one of the cooks again asked me, can you go next door and get something? And I was partially naive and partially worried about saying no because I knew they were going to throw stuff at me again. So I walked across the parking lot, and sure enough, here they come, both of them, whipping tomatoes. And I got pegged with one, but the other ones were missing because it was starting to get dark. It was dusk, so they didn't have as good of an aim. Although I guess I had my white apron on, so it made me an easier target. I went inside the prep room, and I spoke to the prep guy. I said, they're throwing tomatoes at me. And so what he did this time was he handed me a sheet pan, it's probably 18 inches by 36 inches, big sheet pan for those that aren't familiar with it. And that was my shield. So I had this thing in front of me, and I'm carrying whatever it was back, and they're throwing the tomatoes, and I'm dodging them, blocking them. It was a success that time. I was saved from getting hit with these. It's funny how we wasted food like that. I don't know how expensive a pint of cherry tomatoes was then or is now, but the fact that we just were throwing them, or they were throwing them at the barn and such. So rinse and repeat. Here we are. I'm doing dishes again. Third time they want me to go next door and get something. By this point, I'm just like, oh man, they're trying to just kill me with these tomatoes. So I walk across. It's dusk. They're throwing them again. I forgot to bring my sheet pan with me as a shield. I went inside, talked to the prep guy, said, look, what do I do? So he handed me another sheet pan, and I'm heading back towards the swinging screen door to go out in the parking lot. I've got the sheet pan in my hand, and he tells me, he says, put your hand back. So I give him my right hand, and he put something in my hand, and he said, here you go. Here's your weapon to throw if they start throwing stuff. I took 3 or 4 steps out of the door, and up on the deck by the kitchen back door, one of the cooks pops up, and he's firing tomatoes at me, and I'm blocking them with the sheet pan. Little did I know that off to my right, the other cook was now outside. Boy, it couldn't have been too busy in that kitchen if they're both outside waiting for me. Let me set this up. There was a picnic table and a dumpster. So a lot of the times, you'd either throw the trash in through the side of the dumpster. You had a sliding door. Or if it was very full, you would stand up on the picnic table and throw the trash in. This was more for dishwashers or prep people or servers that weren't strong enough to swing a trash bag up over. I mean, the dumpster was like 7 feet high. So that's what it was for, this picnic table. So this second cook is bobbing up from the picnic table. There's this picket fence that's, 7 feet tall. So he's popping up and throwing it. It's like a protective shield for him. He runs out of ammo. So he jumps down off the picnic table and he's going to run up the steps to the deck back in the kitchen to retreat. From where I'm standing, I'm probably 40 feet from the deck. And the vantage point I probably had a 2-foot wide window from 40 feet away. And I said, I'm going to get him back. So this guy is running up the stairs. I've got my right hand cocked back with whatever it was that the prep guy handed to me as my retaliation weapon. And I fired it. And you could hear the pop as it struck the cook in the side of the head. And he dropped like a sack of potatoes on the deck. It turns out what the prep guy had handed me was a medium-sized red Bliss potato. In my hand, it was pretty much the same size as a cherry tomato, maybe a little bigger. I hadn't noticed. So I'm thinking I'm throwing something that's hard enough, but it turns out I was basically throwing a big rock. And the worst part is, here I am, I'm a 15-year-old dishwasher. The cook that I just nailed with this potato was a good 6'2", 230 pounds. It was a 1 in a million shot. If I tried that same shot hitting a moving target 40 feet away with about a 2-foot clearance, one in a million, I could never do it again. But I nailed this guy and dropped him, and he was laid out on the deck. I ran over because all I'm thinking of is he's going to be pissed off and he's going to just beat the hell out of me. So I ran over to the deck and I'm just horrified and I'm just apologizing, and he's sitting up now on the deck and the other cook is kind of just standing next to him. And I just said, I'm sorry. And the cook was just like, no, it's my fault. They both realized that them throwing the cherry tomatoes at me, it kind of forced my hand, I guess. So nothing came of it. I did not get the crap kicked out of me for knocking a cook out with a Bliss potato. But I can see it so clearly in my head. And I think it was about 28 years ago that this happened. And I can close my eyes right now as I'm recording this, and I can picture it in my head. The sound of the potato hitting him, the sound of him hitting the deck, and my fear and horror of what the repercussions might be. And even the rest of the night, I wasn't sure if something was going to be coming. I wasn't sure if I was going to get something thrown at me later on, but nothing ended up happening. And I do find it ironic that the first 2 editions of Restaurant Storytime consist of me throwing something at someone else. I hope you enjoyed that one. I hope you could close your eyes and picture the whole scene. But I'll definitely have another Restaurant Storytime coming up at some point. Check out the original one in episode 19, and this one here is a good companion to it. What a crazy time it was working in the restaurants in the 90s and into the 2000s. It was a wild time.